edition of this Dairy Cafe. Normally, it is our lovely other trusty sidekick, as you would call us. Feiko isn't here today, so it is you and me.
Yep.
We're stuck with each other. Easy, just
I
in
like
the
it
same
this
room.
way.
Exactly. I like it this way too. We won't tell him. A lot to cover today, or something a bit more specific. We have talked quite heavily over the last month on, let's call it the standard commodities, being those butter, cheeses we have as well, and skim.
Yep.
Today, what we wanted to jump a bit more is, let's say, the odd kid around the block, the one that sticks around, that doesn't that doesn't go down. That is WPC 80.
Yeah.
And so everything to do about whey. Now, as we do every week, we still think it is important to cover some different things in the market, do a general update. There is a lot happening. I can say as
Absolutely,
well, what we've seen on the marketplace, that we have prices that are dropping a bit. It feels suddenly a bit bullish, and then actually it is dropping further.
Yep.
Fundamentals for the moment haven't changed. It is still the same fundamentals that we've seen.
Yep.
But a very interesting market nonetheless.
Absolutely. Yep.
So what do we have on the planning today?
As you mentioned, starting off with a general update once more. I think it's definitely interesting to have a look at the latest price levels because we have seen a lot of trade activity for example, butter, but also cheeses.
Yep.
Milk powder's not that much, but a lot of the fat side has definitely traded a lot this week. So looking at the bigger picture, now more zooming in towards European butter, we have seen a bit of an increase. So prices dipped at 4.9 last week and now increased slightly higher. So we saw a big price range here. We saw people still trading about 4.85, 4.9, but there's also people trading 5.2. So there's a big range in prices there. However,
I think if you did that today again, prices have dropped again below
exactly.
5.
So it's definitely it's a snapshot of the market.
100%.
And we see, yes, there's been some more trade activity, but it's also a lot of buyers that are now kind of fishing. Okay, what do I need still for the rest of the year? There's not that many weeks left for Q4. It's exactly. So that's kind of a squeeze right now. And when sellers, it's not like that's a really, really pressured market because there's a lot of buyers that need to buy. That's not that bad.
Yep.
However, on a week-to-week basis, if as a seller you don't sell anything for a week, there might be a few buyers that are interested to buy at 5. It's not a high price regardless.
Completely.
So for butter, we saw a bit of a rebound, but throughout this week and also what we saw on the marketplace today, prices are moving back down again.
No, 100%. It started Tuesday being a bit quiet. There were some bids, but then the counters that we saw were actually higher than the week prior.
Yep.
There was a bit of volume to cover. There was some very little ones for Q4 or for November, December, and then for Q1. Counters, there was a big spread because I think futures were trading higher. There was a bit of that little bit of a rebound sentiment, which the week finished last week on.
Yep.
So it started that way again. And then suddenly Wednesday was a bit the same thing, but it felt like the spread was getting tighter.
Yeah.
And so we kept on seeing the spread tighter, that's why I was confident that the deal was going to happen, which we've seen today. So today we have seen activities and deals folding through. Just because prices aligned again, it did seem like because the fundamentals haven't changed, buyers weren't ready to actually meet the sellers on the upper end. And so I felt like that's why it's closed on more where the buyers were looking to aim to close off. And we did see some sellers that were ready last week, that wanted to sell 4.8 or 4.9, on, let's say, Ireland or France, and those offers have dropped again this week. So there's clearly movements, and fundamentals, especially from those countries, haven't changed. Now it is important to say it really seems like there's a big disparity, and that's what we saw as well with the
Between
VPI
countries,
yesterday. Exactly. You'd have some producers that are really well below the 5s, and you'd have others that are not at all in the surplus. They are struggling to even meet their contracts. So it seems like there's two different worlds they live in.
This is definitely a familiar story, not just for butter, but for many other products as well.
Yeah, completely. And it does seem like the co-ops that have their own retail brands are not in the northern countries aren't really in the market.
No, that's actually I was looking at and it's a bit of a deep dive at Dutch production numbers over the past few months, and actually with the milk that was available, the only product stream that saw more production over the past year. So there's like retail products,
Yeah.
so like packaged milk, for example, and commodity butter, commodity cheese, commodity powder. The packaged milk or the retail products were the only category that actually increased in volume. So we really see that there's a preference for that stream. And yes, that leads to lower commodities. Of course, if the milk intake in the entire continent is as big as it is right now, it will lead to more commodities. But
Yeah.
it does show you that not everyone is forced to sell everything as commodities. So they can create some differences.
Completely.
This week also cream moved up a little bit. I'm not saying that this really has a big effect on the market, but from below 6 to 6.1, it definitely kind of puts a small bit of support or much more of a floor in the market. But still, there's a lot of cream available, and many expect actually that the price is going to go down further. So plenty about butter already, but it doesn't feel like this is the end of the weaker market just yet.
No, completely.
Looking at powder this week, let's kick it off the non-butter section with that. Powder's actually moved very much sideways. Also there we see strong differences. We see people below 2 for older volumes, but now also for slightly fresher volumes below 2. And the top of the market still around 215, for example. But even that 215 is actually on par with where the global market is. So US Oceanian product is much more priced around those regions. We do expect that those prices should normalize, and actually in the European market slow down a little bit more because we have more than enough, and it's concentrate is cheap, milk is cheap, so it doesn't feel like this is the end. Then we have a couple cheeses, because cheese markets were actually quite interestingly
100%.
active this week and last week. I talked to a few cheese buyers, and yes, they have been postponing their purchases for quite a while. If I'm looking at cheddar prices right now, but let's take mozzarella, for example. I'll exclude the US price level for now, but if we look at the bigger picture, then yes, mozzarella prices came down heavily, and anyone who still had some volumes open was very happy to leave them open before the end of the year and then buy it when the time is ripe.
Yeah.
It looks like and it sounds like the time is kind of more ripe right now. So buyers are fishing for offers. They're asking, okay, hey, what can you do? And therefore we see a bit of more activity at prices well below 3.
Completely. No, and interestingly enough, so we added the marketplace exactly, let's say, at the middle of that dip, which in terms of being a marketplace that there's really as well like demand driven, and that has where we have a lot of buyers that are on it. So we were onboarding more and more buyers, but a lot of buyers were saying, listen, I'm good, I don't need products, I'm waiting. So
Call me back in a month or so.
Exactly. We arrived a bit at that time where we saw actually more demand this week. We saw things actually start moving a bit last week for cheeses, which was a great sign. And we're seeing it now, or we saw this week with Gouda mozzarella a bit, which was very positive. Now on the other side, which I was surprised to hear, because prices kept on dropping, so I was like, well, there must be supply, but there wasn't that much supply. If especially from mainland Europe, it didn't seem like mozzarella isn't. A lot of people are actually sold out. So I was wondering why the prices kept on dropping, but that's why we also saw a bit of a rebound. Because there isn't that much availability as well.
No, I think it's a narrow margin. Of course, mozzarella is not really a winter product anyway, so production schemes generally slow down towards the winter months. And at the same time, what's good to note is that especially when markets are slightly weaker for cheese, mozzarella is one of the most difficult ones because the age is relatively young. You have to sell it really quickly. And that means that when it drops quickly, because then that means that generally the age is growing. People need to get rid of it really soon. But when they already kind of know, okay, I have to sell it soon, they kind of start to shift away from mozzarella production when the prices are falling. They rather go for butter and skimmed. I think that's something that we definitely see over the past couple of months. If you don't have to produce mozzarella, you don't. And then that's one of the real kind of drivers with them. Well, sometimes for volatility in a market like mozzarella. But when, for example, in the summer months, when there's a lot of milk and you have to do something with it, mozzarella certainly becomes really interesting as well, because consumption peaks in those months. So this is really a commodity cheese, much more than, for example, an Emmental.
Completely.
So cheese has been weak this week. I would say sideways. Also, looking at the Gouda price, yes, it's still decreased, but only 20 euros. If you look at the bigger
Yeah,
picture,
and Gouda seems like there is a bit more ability in Gouda than there is in Mott's, so
Yeah.
that is a bit different.
Yeah. That's definitely. I mean, the Dutch milk intake was up 7%, and we definitely expect that the cheese production therefore will also be up. The numbers will be released in a couple of weeks, but definitely that doesn't help. Finally, whole milk powder. I think that's before we really want to dive into the wonderful world of WPC 80. I was actually looking at the GDT prices as well as the European price level for whole milk powder. The European price level is dropping fast. Why? Because it's essentially trailing butter and skim quotations at a small distance. So, well, we still see there's some catching up to do. So, based on fair value, whole milk powder should be priced even 200 or 300 euros lower than the price that we see today. So that means whole milk powder will drop soon, or these will keep dropping in the coming weeks. But it's actually quite interesting that the spread between us and Oceania is significantly reducing. Yes, Oceania has a lot to produce, especially New Zealand has a really good milk season. We've been talking about it for a while already. But it has been a while since these prices have been so close together. So yes, we've seen these massive changes in 2022. And of course, if you want to look at the global market for whole milk powder, you generally look at Oceania or New Zealand anyway. But it's really interesting to see that the market is kind of narrowing, or the spread is narrowing. It's definitely something that's quite interesting, because also there we might actually be able to export as a European exporter if you make whole milk powder.
For sure. Yeah, no, it is interesting.
Maybe not yet, but it might be something that could definitely help if you have product to sell. You might dry it, sell it off, and whole milk powder is a great way to get rid of some of their additional milk.
Yeah, 100%. But I do feel like in Europe it is more a ready to order type of product.
It is.
Compared to in Oceania, where it is more of a commodity.
Yep.
They produce so much, and when you are in Southeast Asia, being in Singapore a couple of weeks ago, you just understand the reliance Southeast Asia has on Oceania for their product and for that supply. So it is.
I agree.
Even if we are competitive, I don't feel like we have the production anyway to actually compete whatsoever with them.
No, completely agree. We're not in the market to kind of take away volumes from New Zealand and therefore really compete with them. But one of the reasons why we are moving away from whole milk powder production in Europe is because the internal market is satisfied with some of the own made to order production.
100%, and especially for chocolate.
Exactly, but making for stocks has been very tricky because the demand has also not been that good, and anything that used to be made for exports was taken by New Zealand for basically since 2021. So at this rate, you might see that Middle East, for example, if they want to buy some whole milk powder, and we are about as cheap as New Zealand might be,
and we have some leftovers, and there are some stocks.
It's a small area where we might be able to improve a little bit. And then there's 80. At least WPC 80 instant or WPI prices are at historical highs at 12.4 thousand euros a metric ton, and that's for the European market. If we take the US market, slightly cheaper at the moment, but also there we're heading towards the $14,000 a ton range.
Oh, and that's also just increasing,
and it keeps on increasing. It's a very unique market because you can see it's been increasing since January this year. We're in a huge bear cycle when it comes to the entire dairy market, but whey proteins they don't stick to that logic.
It's interesting to see that that gap narrowing down so quickly. Are we going to dive deeper into why that is the case, or okay?
I think that's definitely an interesting, and I won't make it too technical, but long story short, the market for WPC 80 has become more global and much more of a commodity. So we saw some arbitrage taking place. That's why these markets really adjusted, and a bit more, but I'll explain later. There's also WPI. I know 80 is the much more commoditized product, but isolate has also been through the roof. We can actually see that with $23,500 a ton, US WPI is the most expensive it's ever been, ever since we started publishing this index. When prices of 7,000, so it went times 3 in a matter of 4 years time or 5 years time, I would say.
Wow,
it's massive, and overall I think the protein markets are not sticking to the bearish fundamentals. Why? Because we have a lot of additional milk, we produce a lot of additional cheese, but the additional whey that comes free cannot all be transformed into 80 or isolate because we simply don't have the production capacity
Yeah,
for
there's
it.
no capacity for it.
So we make a lot more commodities, but of course, we also grow in 80 and in isolate because if you know that the price is going to be much better than a regular whey powder, you will produce more isolate and more 80. But the production capacity is relatively limited. I think that's something that if we focus, for example, on the WPC80 market in the United States, if we look at the monthly production numbers, yes, we see, and I'll switch to the year-to-date volume so you can actually have a look. If we take the 2022, I love zooming in this case. It's a bit large, but hey, we're presenting our screen, so why not? Since December 2022, we really saw that the 2023 values and also 2024 values are kind of, there's a lot of openings of new production facilities and the capacity increase. So yes, we're doing something there, but it's also not off the charts. Yes, we're producing more, but
I think compared to how the demand has increased and evolved over the last few years with this whole, I mean, especially you see this whole craving for protein.
Yep.
And you saw how fast it moved from the US and now everywhere in Europe. You know, we have friends, etc. That Ozempic, and it is really taking over. So you see just consumption going through the roof.
Yep.
While we see production increasing as well, but just by little margins.
Yeah, then that's actually why WPI, which I'm looking at the screen right now, is even more interesting because we know that production has been growing and there's an interest to produce. But if we look at isolate, for example, we know that with the knowledge that we just mentioned, isolate is at the highest prices we've ever seen. WPI has never been this expensive. We also haven't seen this much WPI be produced in, for example, the US market ever. So even though production it's limited, of course, that's a problem. It's the consumption that's really driving this.
It probably almost doesn't matter how much you produce because consumption just gonna eat it anyway.
Exactly. And you mentioned a couple of things already. GLP-1 medication like Ozempic, it definitely plays a role. They're being prescribed by their doctor to actually consume whey proteins, not milk proteins, but whey proteins because they're consumed relatively easily or digested relatively easily. And the average consumer has whey protein almost everywhere.
No, completely. And I mean, that is what we're used to being here, but being in Asia a couple months ago, you're just seeing it everywhere. You just go to your 7-Eleven and you're seeing protein powders right and left. You're seeing bars. The drinks, you can't even count how many different drinks you're seeing. And that is the same in South Korea. That's the same in Japan. Southeast Asia, everywhere has that. So it's not just a European or a US consumption that's going through the roof due to medication or just a healthier way of living and just how protein has had such a good image over the last few years here. It's also there. So that's what's making it just with a demand that's just unstoppable almost.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting that of course we see that some dairy consumption patterns they change and they move kind of they're copied in outside of Western Europe or the Western world. We see that a lot of other countries are starting to consume more cheese, even butter now in China is a bit booming. Milk powder has been high and good everywhere for a while, actually decreasing a little bit. But if we take whey proteins, this is definitely booming in a lot of countries, and I think that's also why a part of this market or at least part of why this market is so tight is that we, for example, have a Chinese import number, what we're looking at right now, which is very much on par with previous years. So we see that the Chinese import, if we take, for example, skim milk powder, and we compare it to previous years, the September value, or at least the value between January and September, because we're looking at year to date, it's practically half. It's 49 point something percent compared to 2021. So we saw a sharp decrease, and especially towards 2024, and then 2025 is slightly lower, but negligible. But if you look at 80, it's just as high, and really this shows you that the interest of Chinese market, but also in Northeast Asian market, for example, if you take Northeast Asia, but also Korea, Japan are included. We see that there's a lot of imports of these products towards regions that originally don't always consume whey protein. But the fact that these are popping up on top of the stuff that we're also seeing regarding consumption in Europe, in the US, it's massive.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly what you're seeing there, right? You're just seeing a lot in all those, and I mean that's counting here China, which is in par compared to the previous years. but you'd have Japan or Korea, which is importing a lot
Yep.
more, which they had. I just keep on seeing questions pop up, and I
Oh,
realize we haven't touched on
we
any
usually
of
have
them.
Feiko with
Yeah, exactly. With the two of us, it's a bit tough. Apologies. I think the first one is just going back very quickly to S&P fat, home milk production.
Yeah.
What are European economics favoring cheese or skim milk powder with fats or whole milk powder production?
At the moment, and we have a great widget for that. I'll add it live on screen. That's the valorization widget, because that's essentially what you're doing.
Yep.
You're having a look at, okay, what are the different options I can make? So add to the dashboard. Historical milk valorization is now at the bottom. So if I move back down, and I look at the European values for my milk, this has a lot of
Different
context. So
lines. Yep.
I'll just focus on, let's say, Gouda, whole milk powder, and S&P. We see that whole milk powder, because of the delay in how it reacts to butter and skim prices, whole milk powder is currently much better.
Yeah.
Second, we have S&P in butter, and cheese is actually dipped below S&P in butter, and that's quite an interesting one, because that's next to the fact that you can't store it longer. It also means that the storable commodities like butter and skimmed are more expensive and more interesting to produce. So we see, bless you,
Thank you.
we see a shift there. And at the moment, all cheeses are, some would call it undervalued, and S&P butter is slightly overvalued. I think it's slightly misleading, because at the moment, compared to Farmgate, everything is undervalued.
Yeah, completely.
But that's at least how we see it. So there's a reluctance to produce a lot of cheese, unless some people don't have a choice. But if you can choose, rather go for storable commodities like skimmed and butter.
Yeah, I think that's a great widget. We always use it here. We always, when we talk about the market, it's one of the first one that we look at. And it's especially great to see over time. And the line that I really use, whole milk powder, is interesting, but not that much. Just because there isn't a consumption to use all the milk and to put into whole milk powder. But the two ones to always compare is S&P and butter and Gouda or Mott's. But I would really use Gouda for that, because mozzarella uses a lot of cream, which is a lot more expensive, which often derails that a bit.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Go back. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just trying to answer the question here. Maybe you know that answer. Maybe you don't. If you don't, we'll have to just come back. What is the difference in price between non and instantized products? Do you know that?
Yes, it's actually not that big. We are looking into this. Actually, on the roadmap is a regular product for WPC 80 for the European and US markets.
Add their Vesper price index as well for.
As a Vesper price index. So we're looking into it. In the US, the market's much bigger than in Europe. In Europe, in the instantized market is much bigger. But let's say in the US, it's like a 5% difference. So it's like let's say $500 a ton. But in Europe, we see it's slightly less. It's worth 200 to 300 euros a ton. So it's around the 12 euro per ton. 12,000 euro per ton mark. So it's only a small margin. So just
to make it instantized product.
Yeah, it's essentially what you do is you have the regular WPC 80. You add sunflower lecithin in Europe or soy lecithin in the US. It's kind of the most familiar product, and you add a little bit to it to make it instantized. It's not that much more expensive, but yeah, for sometimes A is more expensive than B. So
Perfect.
It's a relatively small discount, 1 or 2% to, in this case, 5 in the US.
Easy. That brings me to another thing, and I think that was an interesting question. And of course, we always talk about here WPC 80, WPI, those big products, because the prices are that high. But of course, there is one thing that you can use, or not per se as a replacement, but it's kind of the same, and as MPIs and MPCs.
Yeah.
How would you see the market for MPC 85 or MPI 90? They're also growing a lot, and they're very versatile in terms of products that you can use in etc. Where do you see the market for those as well?
I will actually show you guys by using the price comparison, which is in this case, we need to look at multiple products at the same time. I won't make this a demo, but it's definitely interesting to compare. For example, did the question mention Europe or US?
Didn't, but any of the other, but let's just
and then also at the same time do WPC 80
I think it's a great widget to be able to compare different
Yeah.
Different products. The first one that we always show you can use the same products but different regions.
Yeah.
And what's cool with the price comparison, you can put this different prices next to each other, and you can put any of them.
Yeah.
I think for this one, it's extremely important to have a look at both of them on the same graph.
Exactly, and that's what we're doing right now. So in light green, light blue, we have European 80 and US 80, and then in what is it? Dark blue. My color blindness doesn't really help here.
It is color blue.
And yellow for
Dark
US
blue.
MPC. Definitely show a huge difference in price.
Yeah.
And this is where these markets are completing or affected by completely different factors. Yes, we are hearing that some sports nutrition guys that used to only use whey protein are now considering to switch to milk protein, but that only works in not like the whey shakes that you use. Yes, of course, it's called whey shake for a reason, but those are much easier to digest and use like on its own. While with milk protein, it's better to consume it with like a ready to mix or ready to drink a meal where it's like included with all these other flavors.
Or in yogurts, I've heard, or in in protein bars.
Yeah, exactly. So it's more of a functional food where if you need to add a little bit of protein to your food, you use MPC. While if you kind of need a product really focused on protein, then whey is generally the way to go.
And is that the reason why we're seeing, for example, those protein bars and those ready to drink meals, the price aren't exploding? If you compare it to your WPC 80 price, is it because they can use MPC, or they can kind of replace some products, or are they just reducing the margins simply?
It's a bit of both. So we've talked to somebody who has been using milk powder and WPC in one of his products, and he's going to switch to MPC because it's much more favorable. So that's where we see something change. But at the same time, I would say that, and that's also what I know this as, I wouldn't say average consumer, but I have bought a lot of whey protein over the years. The price doesn't go up because a lot of these brands are popping up and they want to steal each other's market share, and the market's growing. So at the moment, there's a lot of share to be achieved or gained by everyone, but they're eating up their own margins first. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I didn't really notice a price increase for many of my whey proteins.
No, I buy protein every month. And no, it hasn't changed.
We might have sub protein index. Yeah,
my protein consumption
exactly,
and price that I pay.
And I think also a very important difference or thing that we need to mention here is that MPC and SMP are very much linked together. Especially in the US market, we see that MPC is priced based on SMP or non-fat dry milk. With a multiple. And since SMP is so incredibly cheap, it's essentially filtering it down, or concentrating it becomes MPC. It's a bit more nuanced than that, but just very straightforward. So with SMP markets at their historical lows almost, or at least the 5-year lows, we definitely see that MPC is also affected by that. And it's definitely one thing that we should consider, that for whey, that's simply not the case.
Yeah, clear. That brings us to the last question that we have here as well, which is also interesting. Do we see the outputs for sweet whey powder going down at the same time? So relocation or upgrading?
Yep. It's almost like I prepared that.
It's good. Great question, guys. Thank you.
So in Europe, we don't have a lot of production numbers to work with, but even there we have something. For the US, I'll be quick. The answer is yes. We see dry whey. We know that cheese production is through the roof in the US, and still we have dry whey production that's lower on a year-to-date basis. So we definitely see that whey is being put into WPC, WPI. Also, the reason why whey concentrate is much more expensive, and they deprioritize dry whey. If you want to look at European numbers, they are available. So don't worry, we have production numbers for Germany and France. If you go for whey powder production, this is sweet whey powder, also acid whey powder. But this shows you, and I'll have to look at the monthly. Well, you can actually see it in the yearly volumes as well, but the monthly ones I find they're even more interesting. That
that has a direct impact on
exactly. Not everyone, and that's the difficult part. Not everyone can switch. You don't have 2 drying towers. You just send it left or right. That's not how it works. But it can be that a producer of 80 simply buys a bit more, starts running Saturdays, Sundays to make use of this. Well, someone who makes regular whey powder wants to make a lot less.
Yeah, and does that have a direct impact on price as well at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think this will definitely have, or at least this is the way for us to not too theoretical, but the decrease in price for WPC 80 will have to come through additional production capacity for 80 and isolate.
Okay.
The consumption is not going to fall unless all these retail brands or consumer brands are suddenly pulling their price down.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening.
No, but in the price of sweet wheat powder, because we see that production has gone down, do we see price of sweet wheat powder going up?
No,
Or
it's basically
demand is
holding flat
also-
because we have a very stable concentrate price for whey, and then there's like the drying margin on top, and that's where
And it
feed
just hasn't
whey.
moved too much.
No.
Okay. And that brings us to the end of it. So we had to answer a lot of questions.
Always happy
Well, that's
to.
great. Exactly. That makes it very interactive. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, for sending us your messages and your questions. If there's anything, you can always ask us or ask Jasper via mail or telephone, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.